What does speaking human mean to you?
What it means to me is that I'm still me at work. And if I'm having a bad day, I'll talk about it. And if I need to cry, I've cried in meetings. I don't feel that showing up as a real human being makes you look weak or any less than anybody else. In fact, I think there's incredible strength in it.
Welcome to Speaking Human with Dr. Damini. Speaking Human is a storytelling podcast where each episode traces how voices rooted and connected to Asia first learned to communicate, from childhood dynamics through key turning points to the way that they use their voice today. The goal is to explore how communication shapes who we are and to make honesty, vulnerability, and courage culturally aspirational. It is not a show about polished public speaking tips. It's about the messy, vulnerable, and often funny ways we learn to speak to ourselves, to others, and to the world. In the studio with me today, I have Renee Welsh, serial entrepreneur and global CEO behind Embed and Booking Boss, known for scaling tech businesses across the world and championing women in leadership. Her journey, building Booking Boss to acquisition and now leading Embed across more than 56 countries, makes her a powerful voice in this conversation, especially as a woman steering innovation in traditionally male-dominated tech spaces. Renee, you are highly accomplished and there's a lot people can find out about you online. But today I'm hoping that we can meet the person behind the leader and the achiever.
Absolutely.
So thank you for being here. Let's start at the beginning. Tell me about where you were born. What were you like as a child? Who was little Renee? Was she bold, curious, cautious? Who were you?
So I was born in Sydney, in Australia, a number of years ago. And as a child, I was, and this surprises a lot of people, but I was incredibly shy, painfully shy, very quiet, probably introverted. I loved my sport and I was very, very good at sport, but I was not an outspoken person. I've struggled in school and had a number of things going on, and I think I just internalized a lot of that and was super quiet as a result, and that carried through for many years actually.
What was communication like at home? Like, were other members of your family also like that, or were they more outspoken? Were you encouraged to have a voice?
I definitely was encouraged to have a voice. My parents divorced when I was, or separated and then divorced when I was 6 and my brother was 4. And it wasn't amicable, conscious uncoupling as they call it today. Let's just put it that way. What was interesting about that separation was not that the separation itself bothered me. Obviously, it was, a stressful time as a child. I can't really remember that, to be honest. But what I can remember is that both my parents really doubled down on the affection and the love and making sure my brother and I were looked after and had a voice. And so we never felt like we missed out on anything from either of them. But what I will say is I did find, and now that I look back on that period of my life, I think that the level of responsibility that brings when you don't have parents together, I became more responsible for my brother and even for my parents in a way. And I look back now, and my parents were only in their early to mid 20s when they actually divorced. So they were babies themselves when I look back. And so I took on this sort of glue of the family relationship, making sure everything was smooth, and just became very, very responsible very quickly. And I don't know, and I've, never thought to ask my parents whether I was like that prior, but I certainly became that post that transition.
So that's really interesting, because there's a chapter in my book, and it's actually called parentification. And that's an actual term for exactly what you're describing, right? Where children having to grow up very quickly and step into these roles, either for an absent parent or an absent partner to a parent. And I think there's a lot of older child, like firstborn child girls especially, who experience that. Do you feel like that role that you took on as a child has played out over time into leadership for you?
Definitely. I mean, my level of responsibility and accountability, and as a result, the pressure I put on myself is much higher, and my expectations of myself are much higher than anyone. My board, my chairman, my husband, my parents. I just hold myself to a very, very high standard. I expect that is a result of having that level of responsibility, or not even that my parents said that I needed to be more responsible. You just sort of innately transition into that type of role. And so it's definitely informed my entire life and career.
It's interesting because they say with parentification, it can go two ways, right? And I talk about this in the book, but one is that you step into this role and you become this caregiver and this glue and this person. And the other path that people take is they fall off the bandwagon, right? And what do you think, if anything, if you have thoughts on it, about you as a person made you choose to step into that path? Or do you think it was completely subconscious?
I would say, obviously, at that age, there was an element of subconsciousness. However, what I would say is that I think that I've always been a compassionate, loving person. And so as a result of leading with that sort of heart, it just naturally led me to make that subconscious choice. Yeah. It was part of who I was already, maybe just not amplified in the way that it became amplified.
So you shared that your parents separated and it was not amicable. How did your family handle conflict? Like, what did you grow up seeing as patterns of conflict resolution, if any? And what have you carried with you?
That's a really good question. I would say that there are a lot of patterns. I mean, look, there's a lot of high emotion and hurt and in those situations. And so the communication and conflict came from that place, I think, particularly for my dad. And so what on reflection, I think I was sort of like trying to make peace and make sure everyone was happy and sort of avoid ultimately any conflict between my parents at that young age. And what's interesting about my childhood is that when my parents separated, I actually went to live with my dad, my brother and I. And so I was with my dad till I was 12. And then my parents made a decision that because I was going into high school and becoming a woman and all these things, that I should then go and live with my mum. That was another pivotal transition, particularly for my brother and my relationship as well. So I think that's quite rare. Most children end up with their mother initially. We saw mum regularly, obviously, but we would have transitions in the McDonald's car park and things like that. That just was normal for me. I would say that I have evolved my and certainly invested in myself and through coaching and therapy and things like that to, I guess, better myself and improve my ability to navigate conflict. Yep. And so how I deal with things now is very, very different to how I dealt with things when I was a child.
When you were a child. And so when you say that at the age of 12, when you went to live with your mum from having been with your dad, and you said you called it pivotal. Pivotal how?
Well, I think that because I was the only female in the house with my dad and my brother, and I really felt like I had that sort of maternal, balance. I provided that maternal balance and a little bit of guidance in some ways, that it was very difficult leaving them and then going to live with my mum, who I loved. And my mum had another baby by then, my little sister, who's 10 years younger. So that was exciting. And the whole change was exciting to me, but I still felt like it was also difficult just leaving dad and my brother. Yeah.
It's also a time, I guess, as you were entering into your teenage years and adolescence sort of looming. How did those adolescent years then shape you? being in clearly a new environment with your mum and a new baby. And you said, there were patterns and things that you'd picked up when you were a child that you'd internalized. How did this phase of your life shape your identity as a person?
I went through sort of probably two pivotal shifts during my high school years. And in Australia, you don't have middle school. So you enter high school at sort of 12, 13 and go through to finishing. And I was still a very, very shy, quiet child. And I wouldn't say I was very academic. I really struggled academically. I had to work very, very hard to achieve anything. And so I always wanted to succeed. But one of the things I will go back and say is even before moving to my mum's house, an area and an outlet for me was work. So I actually had, as a child, 8 years old, all these golden books in back in the day, like books. And I created a library in my room and I would rent out my books to friends for, 20 cents a pop. And I had my own library. And so I always was, my father and my stepfather both have their own businesses and I always worked with them. And so I really felt like that was an outlet that I enjoyed. So that theme started early. Then I went into high school. Again, always had a job outside of school. So I worked at where my little sister went to nursery. I worked at her preschool and ultimately went and got a job at McDonald's and all sorts of things. But that theme, I think, sustained my confidence. And that's where I found my confidence and my voice through work, not necessarily at school. I went to an all-girls school up until year 10. And I really struggled in that environment because I was shy and I wasn't academic, but I wasn't the cool kid. So I didn't really fit into any particular group. And I got to year 10 and realized I needed to make a fundamental change. This isn't working for me.
And so when you decided that this isn't working for you, what did you do?
Basically went home from my year 10 formal crying to my mum. I had a horrible year 10 formal and just said, I hate this school. I can't stay here. Please move me. And what I will say about my parents is they just go into action mode. And so it was very late in the year and every school placement for year 11 and 12 was taken. And she just hounded this principal until they accepted me and I got into a new school.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. So how did that shift? I mean, let's call that another pivot, right? So how did that move impact you?
It really just gave me a fresh start. And it was a school that was co-ed. So year 11 and 12 was co-ed. And so I felt like the female energy was a little bit more calm and relaxed in comparison to what I felt in my girls' school. And so I really just seamlessly integrated. Fortunately, from my McDonald's job, I had a lot of friends that also went to this school. So it was actually a really easy transition. And that 2 years, I think I really thrived. My schoolwork improved. I had lots of different friends, lots of male friends, which I still have today. And so it was a really wonderful time in my life for those last 2 school years.
I'm so glad to hear that. And it's so interesting because actually I would say my experience is almost like the complete opposite because I moved from international school in Beijing to Perth actually in my final term of year 10.
Oh, wow.
And so going into this all-girls school environment in Perth, and I felt like I could just be the nerd that I was, and like I didn't have to be cool in that environment. And actually allowed me to focus and perform and be my whole self in a way that I think maybe, I mean, I wouldn't say I ever shrunk myself in a co-ed environment, but I do feel like I was able to really thrive in those final 2 years. Yeah. And I suspect that if I had been in a co-ed environment, there may have been too many distractions for me personally as a person.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about teenage years and love and how that shapes identity?
Of course. I I think I was a little late to the party. Like I said, I wasn't a cool kid. I wasn't a nerd. And but in year 12, I created some lifelong friendships that in those last 2 school years that I immensely value today. And so I started dating, at school, 17, just after 17. And I subsequently got married to my boyfriend. He was older. He didn't go to school with me, but obviously that didn't work out, and I am remarried and have a wonderful husband and 2 children. But I think that for me, I really didn't understand what I wanted out of a relationship. I knew I wanted to be loved, and I knew I wanted to have a partner, and I think he ticked a lot of boxes, and we had a lot of fun together. But in hindsight, we just didn't grow together, and probably made that decision far too young before I had any level of experience.
Well, we've all done dumb things in our younger years.
Yes.
It's great that we're so wise and having this conversation now and not then. So you finished high school and things kind of turned around when you went into this co-ed school. Tell me what happens from there, like uni, early years of work.
I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. At one point, I was tossing up flight attendant, then realized I really didn't like waitressing, and ultimately I felt that was most of the job. And so for me, it was a process of elimination rather than a process of this is exactly what I want to do. And a girlfriend of mine at the time was going into the travel industry, and given I had that sort of idea about flight attendant, I thought, maybe I'll go and do an advanced diploma in tourism and travel. And so that's exactly what I did. And I really excelled at that course. I graduated early. In fact, my girlfriend and I were 2 of the first to graduate early from that course, and we were placed in a work placement prior to the course finishing because we did so well. And that, funnily enough, just set me on this incredible journey in my career, because the first job I had out of that course was to work for the first online travel agency in Australia. And so it was the .com boom, and things were transforming, and being at the forefront of that was incredibly exciting.
And what was it like being a young woman in this space in Australia at that time?
Well, I think I still hadn't really found my voice at that point. I was still ultimately that shy girl, but just knew my capability. I knew I was hardworking, and the hard work really sustained me and gave me that drive and passion. And so that's really all I focused on, is doing a good job, working hard, turning up every day. And I was fortunate to have some really good mentors throughout my early career and right through to now, which helped a lot as I navigated that pathway. But one of the things I did realize in those early days was I worked at the travel agency for a period of time and thought, you know what, I really need a university degree. And so I went to work for a law firm in their marketing department and started an e-commerce and marketing degree. When I was doing that, the boss that I had at the marketing department was horrendous, a female boss. She was highly accomplished, extremely successful. But I actually found this a number of times, and we'll talk about it. But the way that in those days, the management styles for a lot of female leaders was very masculine. They really tapped into that masculine side. And so I found it really jarring. I never did anything right. I felt really on edge. But I knew I was succeeding at the same time. And so she resigned, and I actually I don't know how, I say I'm not confident, but then I look back and I think, how did I do this? I went up to the boss when she resigned and said, I want her job. I love that. And I'm like, I don't know what possessed me or what thought but I knew I was capable of doing it, probably way too early. And he was so respectful, and he was wonderful, and he sat me down and said, okay, we can trial it, but why don't we do X, Y, Z? And he gave me a few projects and whatnot. And while I ultimately didn't end up in that job, I really valued his guidance. He didn't just say, what are you talking about? You don't know half of what is entailed, etc. He didn't do that at all. And that really, again, just gave me a little bit more confidence each time. And I think that courage and confidence is a muscle. And one of the things as I look back on my career and how I act now is that even if I'm terrified, I will do it and then navigate what comes. And so that's never held me back, because I think my own self-confidence has always been relatively strong.
That's beautiful. You know, it makes me reflect on actually the way that I do things. And I think it's really interesting that you said you just do the thing even if you're scared, and then you'll deal with the consequence later. And I think for a lot of people in the Asian context, but also for a lot of millennials in general, and especially women, it is that fear of, what if I don't make the right decision? Or what if this isn't the right move? Or what if I don't execute this thing perfectly, right? And often that fear just actually paralyzes you and stops you from doing things. And when I really reflect on my life experience, I would say a big part of why I am like that is that growing up, I don't feel I was necessarily empowered to make choices and then to own the consequence, right? As a leader today, how do you create enough psychological safety for the people that work for you, but also, I guess, as a mother for your children? How do you create that environment where people can exercise that muscle and be like, okay, you know what, I can make choices and decisions, and I say this to my coaching clients all the time, that there's no right or wrong decisions. It's you're making the best decision you can with what you have, and you're going to own the consequence one way or another, and that's fine, right? How do we create those environments?
That's a really good question. I think one of the ways over the course of my career, and certainly in my role now, that I create that environment is by leading by example and doing it myself and talking about it. The second way is to ensure that everyone knows that really there is no wrong decision. Because even if it turns out that that wasn't ideal, you know, there is always something to learn from it. There is a reason why it happened, and there's a growth event that comes from it. And while that might sound a little bit, you know, oh yeah, you know, easy for you to say, it really genuinely, it can hurt sometimes. Don't get me wrong. I've made plenty of wrong decisions. But if I didn't make those wrong decisions, I would never make a decision. Yep. And so I just feel like forward momentum, and certainly I'm very, very much a personal growth. How can I be the best version of myself? What else can I do for the team? Back to your question, which was around creating psychological safety. The consequence of being a female CEO and leading the way I do has been very interesting, because there is an intentional and an unintentional benefit in creating psychological safety from that. And it comes back to, like I said, leading by example, being at the front, asking the stupid questions. I am not afraid to ask silly questions if I don't understand what's happening in a meeting. And so demonstrating that every single time gives other people confidence to do the same. And I have found that has happened in our organization as they've seen me do that. Jeff Bezos has and Amazon have this theory. There's a one-way and a two-way door. And so this is what we talk about at our work. You know, most decisions are two-way doors, right? There's very, very few one-way doors. And so as long as you know that you can pivot, come back, change, it's fine. Make the decision. Let's move forward. Let's learn. And so I think putting those little things in context and providing that perspective has also helped our team take the leap of faith, make those decisions, and move forward.
I like the one-way and two-way door analogy, because I always I work with so many leaders, right? And I tell them the same thing, that actually there's I mean, don't do anything illegal, but
Of
other
course,
than that,
of course.
other than having children, there is no decision you're going to make that's irreversible.
Exactly.
You can't return to sender with the children, but with
You can.
everything else, you can undo your decision.
Exactly.
And it might not always be easy. And like you said, sometimes it hurts.
Mm.
It's really interesting because there's something you touched on a bit earlier about female leaders who felt like they had to be very masculine. And that kind of was, in a way, what society said they needed to be in those seats, to have a seat at the table. It's interesting because I've seen that end of the spectrum, but I've also seen women leaders that I work with where they say things like, oh, my team treats me like I'm their mum and I need to be I need to hold my boundaries a bit better because they see me as this nurturer and, they walk all over me. And so where is the sweet spot according to you, and how do you manage that dynamic?
That's a really interesting question. I would say I've worn all of those hats and then found my own style. When I first became a manager and a leader, I emulated what I knew, which was female leaders that were more masculine and tapped into that energy, and that ultimately did not work for me. I've gone sort of the more caring, compassionate route. That didn't work for me. And so I've tried on all of these hats to see what's fit. But where the sweet spot is, certainly for me at least, is it's difficult to explain, really, isn't it? Because I think that I am a compassionate leader and I have a level of empathy, but I also hold myself to such high standards that I have very high expectations. So what I would say for me is the sweet spot is setting the expectations clearly, whether you call them expectations, boundaries. I think both are important, but I definitely feel those expectations and making sure it's clear to the team helps find a balance between being cutthroat and masculine and being compassionate and empathetic. And you can be all of those things. I think this is the thing. We can be all of these things. It's not one or the other. And in any given moment, I probably have flexed my style in different ways. But not what I would say as a leader is don't be afraid to flex that and to see what works and what doesn't. And, we're also leading human beings, right? We're all human beings. We've all got stuff going on in our lives. And you just have no idea what's happening in other people's lives. And that's definitely something that I talk to my team about. I certainly talk to myself about that frequently because it's so easy to assume the worst in people. And to think, they're horrible or whatnot, but you just don't know what's happening. And so when you think the best in someone, it definitely helps that connection.
What does speaking human mean to you?
Speaking human means to me that I am not, while I have I'm multidimensional and I have different aspects of my life, and I don't come in and share absolutely everything to do with my life at work. What it means to me is that I'm still me at work. And if I'm having a bad day, I'll talk about it. And if I need to cry, I've cried in meetings. I don't think that certainly for me, I don't feel that showing up as a real human being makes you look weak or any less than anybody else. In fact, I think there's incredible strength in it. And so that is what speaking human means to me.
That's beautiful. Thank you. It's interesting because what you've just said, about you don't know what people are going through, and then showing up and kind of leading by example is a lot of what is in the book actually as well, because it's about understanding that messy context of being human, and we often talk about, when I'm doing workshops and stuff, one of the things we talk about is authenticity. So the A in human in my framework stands for authenticity. Yeah. And as a leader, when you show up as a whole person, right? What is that balance between authenticity and vulnerability and power? right? Because like you said, you're not giving up your power by showing up as a whole person because you are in control. I mean, if you're a blubbering mess 90% of the time, yes, that's a real problem.
Obviously, yes.
Right? But that's as a leader. And I feel like as a leader, it's a little bit easier, right? There's a reason you've gotten to where you've gotten to because you've made choices and decisions and you've lived your life in a certain way. For the average employee in a company, right, we're seeing this movement where people are using authenticity and vulnerability almost as an excuse for laziness or bad behavior in the workplace. So how do you draw that boundary?
That, for me, comes down to expectation. And so there is an expectation, obviously, on me as a leader to do certain things, but that does not preclude my team from being accountable and having expectations of them as well. And so when we both show up in that environment, you naturally actually connect and create boundaries. But if the expectation is that I, as a leader, need to be responsible for our culture, I need to be responsible for all the deadlines, I need to be responsible, that does not work. Because you are here also for a reason. And that is part of your journey, your personal growth, your career development. That's a big part of the responsibility you need to take in your own journey and your own path. And so I think for me, it definitely comes down to that expectation piece and holding my team accountable in that way as well.
So this is one of the big frustrations that leaders that I work with have, right? Especially in an Asian context where they feel like people don't take that accountability. The buck kind of does stop with the leader and it's all on the leader. And if people like the leader and they respect the leader, they'll do what they're being told. But there's not really that co-ownership of culture, outcomes. What's your experience been working in Asia and what have you struggled with most?
I think the biggest struggle is open communication and speaking up at the right time. And so a lot of, and we've got, I think, over 30 different cultures across our business. So extremely diverse in terms of our cultural diversity. And with I guess our Asian team, particularly in Singapore, is they will speak up after a decision has been made or after an event happens versus advocating for themselves and speaking up prior. And some of this is fear-based because we have a very different culture than a traditional Singaporean business. And, we don't have, while we've got hierarchy in a sense, we really do have quite a flat culture. Everyone is a leader in our organization and everyone has an opportunity to lead in their own way. But it is a challenge when you feel like you've all agreed on something. You walk out of the room and then a month later or a week later or a day later, these voices start, bubbling up to say, oh, but, well, you had an opportunity back here to speak about that. Why are you bringing it up now? And so that certainly has been a challenge to navigate.
And how have you managed to navigate this, or how are you attempting to navigate this?
I think that, the way that I navigate it is I actually have smaller meetings. So while we have an all hands and we obviously have a Q&A, very few people in our rest of world Q&A actually speak up and ask questions. So the way I navigate it is smaller meetings so people feel more comfortable speaking up. The way I navigate it is I have one-on-one 15-minute conversations with my entire team every year. Now, there are 130 of us. So yes, you can't do that as you start scaling a bit more broadly, but I've thought about ways that I can still access that. And by doing those 15-minute conversations, it does enable people to bring up things that are, bothering them or that they're interested in. And it just helps them understand that communication is valued and that I want to hear their voice and that they have access to me. And so that definitely has helped in that process. but I would say that it is an ongoing reinforcement. You can't just set and forget.
Do they ever actually come to you with like a real burning like situation when they have that 15-minute one-on-one, or are they just so excited to be with Renee the person and just be, you know, in that moment with you, getting to know you?
I would say it's a combination. Vast majority of the calls, which has been really interesting, have been asking me what my schedule it is and how I do it. And certainly if they're new mothers, how I navigated that situation. And so that's been really interesting. What's my favorite television show? What music do I listen to? You know, really interesting things like that, which I never expected to be, you know, asked. And I've been doing this for a number of years now. Yeah. Some people, though, do come prepared and really take that opportunity to say, okay, this is a challenge I have. It could be a personal challenge in their career development that they want to unlock, so more coaching. And so really it's where am I coach? Where am I manager? You know, where am I just Renee answering what my favorite television show of the moment is? Yeah.
I love that. And I'd be really, really interested to see how this pans out as you grow as a company and how you do manage to continue sort of enabling these types of conversations and communication. I want to shift gears a little bit. Can we talk about a story of a challenge or conflict or burnout or backlash that changed how you communicate as a leader?
Changed,
or maybe not changed, but shaped.
There's plenty of examples. I'm wondering if I should go burnout or challenge. So we had one very major client that we had a challenge with, and it was really difficult to navigate because there was a lot of emotion and, you know, they're an important client and just a lot of miscommunication.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, when I'm troubleshooting something or working through something, it comes down to miscommunication. And so what I have done as a consequence of that particular challenge, just in terms of my communication and the way that we structure things, is we fundamentally changed our process around communication with key clients. We put in a very structured process. We put in accountability matrix. We put in responsibility criteria. And we also changed up the cadence with which we communicate with these clients. So much more regular updates around what's happening on our side, holding them accountable for what's happening on their side. And so that has been incredibly successful for our organization. But at the time, it took me over a year to work through that challenge and to get the structure in place that we have now. This wasn't a 5-minute fix. And through that, we needed to, you know, make sure that the client, you know, rebuilding trust was a huge part of that 12-month period. And I was intimately involved with the team because when you have a trust breakdown, it's incredibly difficult to build that back up and gain that trust again and have a really solid partnership with your client. And so the frameworks we have in place now ensure that that trust is not broken, so we're not having to have this gigantic issue. Don't get me wrong, there are always little challenges and issues, but it certainly has helped that. So I would say that fundamentally changed the way that we communicate with our clients globally. We're also a global organization, and so at any given time I'm working with clients in the US, you know, Australia, Singapore, Middle East, all over the place. And their communication styles and the teams that we're communicating with also change.
Yep.
So having this framework in place is very important.
And do you feel like the framework is then reproducible across cultures then?
Definitely. Because what I have found across cultures is people appreciate feeling like they're being heard. Doesn't matter what culture it is. Feeling like you're truly listening to them and then working together to find a solution. That is universal.
Yep.
That's not culturally based. So yes, the framework definitely satisfies those key areas.
Yeah. I think I often use the phrase, people just want to be feeling seen, heard, and significant.
Yeah.
Right? And the other thing is that they want to feel in control or they want to at least have the facade of being in control of whatever is going on. So I want to see your frameworks. How do you navigate boardrooms, investors, strong personalities? Like, I'm sure you see plenty of that. Do you ever feel like you have to step into being a certain version of Renee in those situations, or how do you navigate it?
I would say definitely in big client meetings or when we're negotiating legal agreements with lawyers or whatnot. Of course, I come into that with a very clear intention and structure and just make sure I'm well prepared, I think. Do I change who I am in those meetings? I would say I definitely draw on my tool set in terms of how I speak, when I speak, how I sit. Body language is important, and just making sure that you are a part of the room and you're not in the background. And again, that has been trial and error for me over the years. Walking into those rooms now, I don't worry about it. Sometimes I still get nervous, but I'm not necessarily worried because I know my stuff. Yeah. And that gives me confidence walking into that meeting. But I also would say I'm a decent listener. And so often, and sometimes I don't feel like I need to go into that room and talk all the time. And I get so much value often by listening and then responding when appropriate than I would if I just came in with my own agenda and plowed through the meeting and missed the mark. And so that has, by finding that balance and really listening, I think for me at least has been a lot more powerful for me, because then when you do speak, they are listening. Yeah. And they're really interested in what you have to say.
And also when you speak at that point, having heard them, you can speak in a way that is really going to land for them. So that's actually, it's funny because the H in the human framework is hearing, to deeply listen beyond responding. Yes. Right. And I think often we're only listening to the other person to be able to respond or react or like make the next point that we want to make or defend or impose our own point of view. And when you actually, Stephen Bartlett said this on Diary of a CEO when he was here in Singapore. He said that if you just listen, often people will tell you everything you want and need.
Exactly.
Right. And it's
definitely
so
happens.
true.
Yes.
Because when you just hold that space and then you hear them and you understand their context and where they're coming from, and suddenly you can moderate and say what you want to say in a way that's just going to land and get buy-in wherever you need it.
Definitely.
So that definitely sort of ties in. Talk to me a little bit about what has the shift been for you? You know, you've moved from Singapore to Dubai. We're very lucky to have you in Singapore at the moment to be able to record this. But what has been a big shift for you in communication and culture from that perspective?
I'd have to say in the Middle East, there's a lot more men in the room and a lot of people. They definitely make decisions by consensus. So I've been on Zoom calls and in meetings with 20 people or more to be there to make these decisions and quiz me. And then there's just me and one other colleague of mine. And they're like, where is everyone else? I'm like, it's just us. I would say that definitely is can be daunting because you're just not sure what angle with that many people. It can be daunting. But has it changed my communication style? No, it hasn't. It hasn't changed my communication style. I think that naturally, when I'm in a meeting or in a team meeting, I'm always validating and making sure everyone's on the same page. Documenting it, if there's action items, we've got action items. So everyone's super clear. Yep. And that just, I think, naturally happens now because we do work across so many cultures. And I've got clients and team members across lots of cultures. So it's just a part of how I work naturally.
How you show up. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
how I show up. Yeah.
what biases, if any, have you had to, not specifically to Dubai, but just over your career, what biases, if any, have you had to push through and sort of learn to take up space unapologetically?
Quite a few. I mean, we've all got our biases, and I'm always checking myself. And I think that one of the most stark cultural biases I had was when I first stepped into the CEO role of Embed, and I had to travel to Saudi Arabia, and we were doing a lot of business there. It was just starting to emerge. When I first started going there, I needed to have a chaperone. All sorts of things. Very, very different, very outside my comfort zone. I'd never worked in the Middle East before. So it was all quite foreign to me. And so there was that foreignness, there was a fear associated with it. But what I will say is that very quickly dissipated. And I realized to a degree how my biases and ignorance, I guess, was informing how I thought things would be. However, doing business there, I've never had an issue. All the men are incredibly respectful. I've been able to do incredible deals. And so it's that one experience 7 years ago has definitely changed the way I think about entering a new country, working in a new environment, having to deal with cultural differences in a good way, in a really great way. And I think that we all come into this with sort of our narrow view of the world and how things are. And, women couldn't drive at that point and women can't do this. But it's very different, I think, when you're there and you're experiencing it firsthand.
What about for you specifically, like biases or, sort of preconceived notions that people have had about you? So, there's a story that I share about myself where when I first moved to Singapore, I had this patient, an older lady, and she just absolutely refused to believe that I was the dentist and not the nurse. And she just kept telling me, like, go get the dentist, go get the dentist. And well, actually, I am the dentist and I'm about to pull your tooth out for you. So you might want to be nice to me. But what have you experienced specifically, things that, people assume about you or not?
Oh, I mean, in our early days of starting up, so my husband and I work together. He's the CTO, I'm the CEO. And in the early days when we were raising money and we would go out and be pitching, most people in those rooms would direct every question to my husband. And Andy, my husband, to his credit, would say, that's a Renee question. Speak to Renee. And so I've definitely dealt with those situations before where, even when originally when I was in meetings with my chairman, who's also the founder of our company, and they acquired Booking Boss, and the same thing would happen. He would be the one that was asked the question, and he's incredible at saying, I'm not operational day to day. That's a Renee question. And so I've been fortunate to be surrounded by incredibly strong men that don't or aren't driven by their ego, and so are happy to defer to me, and then that gives me that place in the room. But you certainly in certain circles need to fight for it and stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself as well.
So if you had to give women in an Asian context, or actually in any context, but specifically for an Asian context, who are going into leadership roles, stepping into these types of rooms, what would your advice for them be on how to communicate and hold space for themselves?
Definitely advocate for yourself and be confident walking into the room. If you sink into the room and sort of take your seat and are quietly in the corner, and, you won't be noticed and you will be considered irrelevant to the actual meeting. And so you still, even if you're terrified, and I have been terrified sometimes, you walk into that room, you choose your seat, you sit up straight, and you are there and present and ready to have that meeting. And that is the biggest first step you can
And I think
have.
doing that authentically, right?
Absolutely.
Doing that as the woman that you are and not as the man that you think you need to be.
Correct. Definitely authentically. Bring your own energy. You don't have to pretend to be anything else,
Yeah.
but advocate for yourself.
What are you still learning about communication?
So much. so much. And I will admit I've got 2 teenage children and they are educating me every single day. I am not perfect. I am human as well. And I think sometimes I find certainly my teams forget that because Renee will have the answer. Or Renee, I don't always have the answer, but I will look at the problem and what we've got before us and make a decision based on that information. But I am human. I make mistakes. I'm learning all the time. I listen to so many podcasts.
Yes.
I read books. I'm constantly trying to educate myself so that I can be better at what I do and just a better mum and a better daughter, and every aspect of your life is impacted by the way that you communicate. And so I'm still learning. I'm a student. I'm a student.
We're all exploring. We're still all learning. If your voice had one message for the world, what would it say?
My favorite quote, and my team know this because I talk about it all the time, is nothing great happens in a comfort zone. And so my message is to step outside your comfort zone, continue to flex that confidence and courage muscle, and learn more about yourself through that process and live a really rich and fulfilling life.
Thank you so much for bringing your story, your courage and your voice, Renee, to this platform. I'm sure so many people will see parts of their story reflected in yours. I'm your host, Dr. Damini Chawla. Thank you for joining us and for Speaking Human. Thank you for joining us on the Speaking Human podcast. I'm Dr. Damini Chawla, your host. The purpose of this podcast is to create a society where honesty, vulnerability, and human connection are culturally aspirational. As such, we've asked every guest on the podcast to choose a charity that they like to support. We've included the details of this charity of their choice in the information for this episode. Please feel free to make a donation if the cause speaks to you. Thank you for joining us once again. Do like, follow, and subscribe.